I believe that there's a demonic deception that is so tricky that hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Christians are being influenced by this demonic spirit and they don't even realize it. 2 Timothy 4:3 warns us that in the end times, people will entertain doctrines of demons. They don't want to hear sound doctrine, and they're just going to heap up to themselves teachers that tell them what they want to hear. And on this issue, I see this everywhere. The scary part is that 2 Thessalonians 2:10-11 actually warns us that God himself will send a strong delusion to people that don't love the truth. So what you believe doctrinally really matters. And I believe that a huge number of Christians are being deceived regarding Israel. Now, before you click off this video, please hear me out. So Revelation 16 verses 13-14 describe these demonic creatures that look like frogs that are coming from the mouth of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. And they go abroad to the whole world and they are gathering them for battle. And the place they come to is Har-Megiddo in Hebrew, which is in Israel. Now, I want to pair this idea with some concepts from the Old Testament and you'll see why. Zechariah 12:2-3, God says, "Behold, I'm about to make Jerusalem a cup of staggering to all the surrounding peoples. On that day, I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all peoples, and all the nations of earth will gather against it." Zechariah 14:2 says, "I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle." Psalm 83 describes tons of nations that are joining together and saying, "Come, let us wipe them out as a nation." Speaking of Israel, and in Revelation 12, we see Satan going after Israel through the Antichrist. We know that the Antichrist commits the abomination of desolation in the midpoint of the final 7 years. And after that point, he specifically starts going after Israel and Christians. And then when you look back even to the book of Daniel, we see a war in the heavenlies between Michael the Archangel, which is the defender of Israel, and the demonic prince of Persia, which is a principality in opposition to Israel. And then when you just look at history and all the different people that have tried to wipe out Israel or wipe out Jewish people, you start to see a theme and a pattern. And I would argue that there is a demonic spirit behind this wild hatred of Israel. Now, I know a lot of people like to talk about all of the things that they believe that Israel is doing wrong. And some of the details can be debated because there's a lot of lies and propaganda out there. But even if it's true, I want to invite you to remember the story of Israel in the Old Testament. Many times throughout Israel's history, they went apostate, they joined in with pagan neighbors, they even participated in child sacrifice. There was times when they committed social injustice. There was all kind of temple prostitution and immorality. And a lot of times they just were called out for religious hypocrisy, for being stiff-necked. Essentially, those categories cover everything that they're accused of today. Again, whether the accusations and rumors are true or not. This isn't exactly new. This has been going on since the Old Testament. And the pattern, even in the Old Testament, was that God would judge the nation and punish them, but then he would redeem them. And then he would turn and punish the nations that punished Israel. For example, Assyria was called the rod of God's anger, and God did use Assyria to judge Israel. But then in Isaiah 10, God says, "I will punish the king of Assyria for the willful pride of his heart." Babylon was allowed to conquer Judah, but after 70 years, God said, "I will punish the king of Babylon," in Jeremiah 25. In Obadiah, Edom is actually judged by God for gloating in and boasting in Jerusalem's fall. And I tell you all of this to let you know that you need to be really, really careful to make sure that you're thinking about Israel biblically and that you're not partnering in with Israel's enemies, even if for a season God uses Israel's enemies as a discipline or a chastisement. Because going back to the Battle of Armageddon, Zechariah, Ezekiel 38 and 39, the book of Joel, they all show this end times battle where essentially the kings of the earth, everyone is coming against Israel. And guess who bust out the sky to rescue Israel? You got it. Jesus the Messiah himself comes to rescue Israel. And what does Jesus do to Israel's enemies? Read the book and you'll find out. But it's not good for them. And so I truly believe we're seeing the demonic rumblings that will ultimately culminate in the Battle of Armageddon and all of those Old Testament prophecies where people are coming against Israel. Jesus rescues Israel, and Israel's enemies are judged themselves. And so to make sense of this, we have to understand what is happening prophetically and what God is doing. And most importantly, we have to remember God's covenant. God made an unbreakable covenant with Israel. And Ezekiel 36:22-24 says, "It is not for your sake that I'm about to act, but for the sake of my holy name. I will take you from the nations and gather you into your own land." Isaiah 43:25 says, "I blot out your transgressions for my sake." Romans 11:28-29 says that Israel is God's elect, they are loved for the sake of the patriarchs, and that the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. So as I've discussed in other videos, that doesn't mean that Israel is not going to be judged and disciplined beforehand. That's a huge part of what the Great Tribulation is all about. That doesn't mean that God doesn't have a faith-filled believing remnant right now as we speak, because that's happening too. If you read Zechariah 12-14, it talks about how the tribulation that Israel will go through will end up purging, purifying, and refining Israel, and that anybody that is not truly belonging to Israel will be purged. God is in charge of that. He knows who is who. That's not our job. But what I would encourage you is be really mindful of the strong demonic spirit that is trying so desperately to get people to hate Israel right now, especially when it comes from professing Christians. I know a lot of people don't want to hear this, but all I could do is just ask you, between you and God, to humble yourself before Him and ask Him if you believe the right thing about Israel. It's something that I do myself. I believe that this is such an important and holy topic that I constantly ask, God, am I missing something? Help me not to be deceived. Help me not to lead others astray. And that's all that we can really do, is pray and ask God for discernment, ask God to keep us from being deceived. Look at the fruits of the people that you're listening to. If there's just tons of anger, bitterness, hatred, cynicism, that means something. There's something else at work there. And I have to tell you, of all the controversial topics I've talked about on the internet, there is nothing that touches the pure, venomous hatred I receive back when I say anything positive about Israel, let alone that God still has a plan for Israel. I truly believe there's something demonic happening there. So I just want to warn you guys, as my brothers and sisters in Christ, to just, if all you do is pray, that's good enough for me. All right. Let me know if you guys have any questions. God bless you and have a great day.